Hey everyone, so the PC Destiny 2 beta rolled out this week and I've been waiting for this one for a while now, for a couple of reasons. First of all, Bungie really knows its stuff on consoles, and I've always been kind of curious to see what the firm could do given the vastly increased horsepower available for PC users. And secondly, well, remember when the firm said they couldn't deliver 60 frames per second gameplay on PS4 Pro owing to CPU limitations? Well, with Destiny 2's PC beta, we can actually get a really decent idea of how optimal performance is across a range of processors. I mean, yes, console architectures are very different and generally leaner, but basically it's the same code running across PS4 and PC and of course Xbox One. Engines are architected for commonality. After all, this is a multi-platform project. So let's kick off with the good news. Man, this engine is phenomenally well optimized. I mean, the Pentium G4560, it's an Intel processor priced at just $65, runs at 3.5 GHz with 2 cores and 4 threads. Junior i3 if you like, and it's pretty much the best CPU you can buy right now in terms of frames per second for your money. Price versus performance. And to put that performance to the forefront, I ran the game at 1080p on almost the highest settings with a 1080 Ti and locked frame rate to 60 frames per second. And the idea is to push that CPU to the forefront in terms of measuring performance. And well, it just runs as it should. Whether you're playing PvP in the Crucible or the inverted Spire Strike, it just sort of sticks doggedly to 60 frames per second. I actually found a better stress test in the initial tower defense area of the game. Wave upon wave of enemy troopers are sent to battle you, and this is an exceptionally tough CPU workout. We have tons of enemies here, and with the detail levels set to the max, we're getting the highest fidelity AI, animation, physics, and all of that takes a big toll on the CPU. Factor in the environment, the draw calls necessary to drive the GPU. Oh, and of course the netcode. That's a lot of CPU work. And yet the G4560 can actually pair up quite nicely with the GTX 1080 Ti here. Now then, one caveat I would like to include here concerns the choice of GPU that you pair with the Pentium. Now the 1080 Ti, seems to work out pretty well. With that 60 frames per second limit in place, you won't notice any drops in performance. But what I did next was to factor in the Vega 64 instead. Now at 1080p resolution, it should have no problem handling the game at its highest settings. And we've actually pared back a couple of the more expensive visual effects here just to ensure that the CPU is indeed at the forefront. And as you can see, there are some frame rate drops here. Now, this isn't the fault of the GPU as such, it's more the driver layer that is causing the issues here. So yeah, I mean, this is something to factor into the build of any budget PC really. AMD's DX11 driver overhead, I should say that DX12 and Vulkan are fine, can cause issues where an Nvidia card will just work fine. It's the software part of the equation that is actually more intensive. So I would actually recommend an i5 as a baseline for Destiny 2 with an AMD card if you're looking to game at 60 frames per second. It's actually good news for those with capable CPUs. I played Destiny 2 on an i7 7700K and frame rates range between 120 to 200 frames per second. So yeah, if you have a high refresh rate monitor, you will get value out of this game. But you know what? Destiny has a 30 frames per second mode too, giving a very console-like experience. And the question is this: if a $65 Pentium can hit 60 frames per second, surely it stands to reason that kind of toaster level CPUs can run this game locked at 30. But yeah, one thing I want to mention, you'll note in our footage that there's our frame rate metrics along with Bungie's in-game performance monitor. You'll see that green little number in the top right there. Suffice to say that the developers' efforts here are completely dire and don't actually seem to represent drops in frame rate accurately at all. To cap it off, Bungie has also disabled third-party overlays like RevaTuner Statistics Server, which is kind of unnecessary and actually rather annoying. So fingers crossed, A, they fix the meter, and B, resume support for third-party monitoring tools. So that's the CPU story with the Destiny 2 beta then. The 30 frames per second mode opens up the game to a colossal range of potential CPUs, and while 60 FPS is obviously tons better, let's not forget that Destiny was built with consoles in mind. Millions played the first game at 30 frames per second, and they'll be doing it with the sequel as well. Decent 30 FPS support means that even the most meager gaming PCs will be able to run this one, and even 60 FPS gameplay isn't going to kind of bankrupt you. Now let's keep with the budget theme and see where we need to be GPU wise to get the job done at both 30 FPS and 60 FPS. Let's kick off with Nvidia's GTX 750 Ti. Now, according to the Steam hardware survey, this is the second most popular gaming GPU on the market right now. We've got the reference card here, and yes, we've overclocked it. Plus 200 MHz to the core and plus 400 MHz to the RAM. Ah yes, the Maxwell era of Nvidia cards where tons of extra performance really was free. And well, if you stick to 30 FPS, you can run this close to the highest settings at 1080p with locked performance. So yeah, these are the settings I'm running here, and there's only some minor downgrades. Can you run it at 60 FPS though? I mean, my $65 CPU clearly has the horsepower, but what about our cheapo GPU? Well, yeah, this is tough. Weirdly, the beta's highest quality textures can still fit comfortably in a 2GB card. Good news for the 750 Ti, but everything else I've dropped down from high either to medium or to low. And yes, that 83% resolution scale drops us from 1080p effectively to 900p, but it's required to stand any hope of getting close to 60 frames per second. The tower defense area struggles, as you might expect from one of the most visually demanding areas of the beta, but the strike is holding up pretty well. Now, move across to a GTX 1050, the kind of successor to the 750 Ti. Keep those same settings and restore the resolution scale to 100%, 1080p, and you're good to go. Yes, this is still a lower power card and there are some drop frames, but generally it's lovely and smooth. It's a clear step up from the console experience here, and we're using a cheapo Pentium and a $120 GPU to do it. Scale up to GTX 1060 or RX 580 and you can pile on more bling, obviously. Now for 1080p users, I'd start with the high preset, adjust texture quality to highest and anisotropic filtering to 16x, and you're basically good to go, but feel free to tweak from there. Key settings that hit performance hard: MSAA, depth of field, and the 3D ambient occlusion setting. Be sensible with those, and shadows of course, but feel free to push the others and see how far you get. Okay, so I've had a lot of fun with this one. I mean, just how low can you go? With that 30 frames per second lock in place, I reckon there's a huge scope for customization on lower end hardware. But the fact is that the game is dramatically improved running at twice console frame rate. And as we've demonstrated here, you don't need the latest or indeed the greatest PC gaming gear to produce excellent results. I think it's a testament basically to Bungie's PC work here. The performance level is tremendous, the optimization is just terrific in all areas. But returning to that initial question, do I think that PS4 Pro and Xbox One X could run the game at 1080p 60? Okay, so, well, let's not forget that fundamentally this engine is built to console spec. CPU-wise, it's optimized at the base level for 6, possibly 6.5 available Jaguar cores running at 1.6 GHz, PS4 base spec basically. Xbox One X offers the biggest leap with a 44% increase in frequency. I still don't think that's enough to double performance, but then you look at a game like Project Cars. Well, I've tried running this game with an i3 and we're CPU bound in areas where we aren't on console. So it's actually quite difficult to figure out just how powerful console processors are compared to popular PC parts. But I'll tell you what, when the final game comes out, I'll get hold of an Athlon X4 5350 or 5370 and overclock them to the limits. And we'll see what kind of ballpark performance AMD's Jaguar architecture can provide in its sort of PC guise. Now remember that those Athlons have only got 4 cores and no low-level optimizations will be in place, of course, but at least we'll have a fascinating insight into what the console's low-power CPU cores can actually deliver in the PC space. But that is a test for another time. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed playing the game, amassing the data, and of course putting this story together. Now, as always, please do like, subscribe and share, and follow us on Twitter for the complete digital Foundry experience. But for now, from me, thanks for watching.